The champagne glass shattered against the church floor, the moment Eliza's father said it loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're dead to me." 300 guests stopped breathing. The mayor laughed first, then the banker, then the women who'd pretended to be her friends. They weren't celebrating her wedding to Rowan Hayes. They were mourning her stupidity. "Marrying a worthless cowboy," someone whispered. "She'll be begging to come home within a month." Eliza felt their judgment like knives, every eye waiting for her to break, to admit the mistake, to run. But Rowan's calloused hand tightened on hers, and something in his eyes said, "Let them laugh now. They have no idea what's coming." Before we continue with Eliza's story, please subscribe to our channel and follow this journey to the very end. Comment below with the city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story has traveled. Now, let's return to the day that changed everything. The champagne went untouched. Eliza had paid for it herself, scraped together what little remained of her mother's inheritance to buy 3 bottles for the reception. She thought maybe, just maybe, if she provided something elegant, something proper, the town might see past their judgment for one afternoon. But the bottles sat on the table in the church hall, condensation pooling around them like tears nobody would shed for her choice. "Did you see what she wore?" Mrs. Patterson's voice carried across the room, meant to be heard. "A borrowed dress, to her own wedding." "I heard the cowboy couldn't even afford a ring," someone else added. Eliza stood near the corner, watching Rowan accept a handshake from one of the ranch hands who'd actually shown up with good intentions. Her husband moved with that same quiet grace he always had. Nothing wasted, nothing performed. He thanked the man, spoke a few words she couldn't hear, then turned to find her across the room. Their eyes met, and something settled in her chest. Something the laughter couldn't touch. "Eliza." Her father appeared beside her, smelling of whiskey though it was barely noon. "There's still time." "Time for what?" "To fix this." He gestured vaguely toward Rowan. "Annulment. We could say you were confused, emotional. Everyone would understand." "Would they?" She turned to face him fully. "Or would they just prefer I married the man you chose? The one with the bank account that could save your failing investments?" Her father's face went red. "You ungrateful—" "I'm grateful," Eliza interrupted, and she meant it. "Grateful I saw who you really were before it was too late." He left without another word, shouldering past the guests who pretended not to notice. Eliza watched him go and felt something close to relief. At least now she knew where she stood. At least now. "Mrs. Hayes." The voice came from her left, smooth and cold as river stone. "May I offer my congratulations?" Victor Kane stood there in a suit that probably cost more than the entire wedding. Silver hair combed back, eyes calculating, smile that never reached past his teeth. He owned half the county and wanted the other half. Everyone knew it. Nobody stopped him. "Mr. Kane," Eliza kept her voice steady, "I have to say, I admire your conviction." He glanced toward Rowan, who was watching them now. "Marrying for love rather than security. It's romantic. Foolish, but romantic." "I don't recall asking for your opinion." "No, of course not." Kane's smile sharpened. "But you'll want my advice soon enough. That little parcel of land you two are planning to settle on. It's adjacent to property I'm developing. When you realize you can't make it work, when the romance fades and reality sets in, I'll make you a fair offer. Better than you'd get from anyone else. We're not selling. Everyone sells eventually, Mrs. Hayes. It's just a matter of price." He tipped his hat, a gesture that felt like a threat. "Enjoy your wedding day." Rowan reached her the moment Kane walked away. What did he want? "Our land." Eliza took his hand, kneading the anchor. He thinks we'll fail. Let him think it. Rowan's voice carried no anger, just that same quiet certainty. Are you ready to go? She looked around the room one last time, at the faces that had turned away, at the champagne nobody would drink, at the life she was leaving behind. Yes. They left through the side door, nobody bothering to throw rice or offer blessings. Rowan helped her onto the wagon. Rough wood, nothing fancy, everything they owned packed in the back. As they pulled away from the church, Eliza heard the laughter start up again behind them, louder now that she couldn't see their faces. They think I'm making the biggest mistake of my life, she said. Rowan clicked the reins, guiding the horses toward the mountain road. Are you? No, she said it without hesitation. But I'm scared. Good. He glanced at her, something fierce in his eyes. Fear means you're paying attention. Means you're smart enough to know this won't be easy. The cabin appeared after 2 hours of rough travel. It sat at the edge of where civilization gave up trying, surrounded by pine trees and silence. One room, stone fireplace, roof that had seen better decades. Eliza climbed down from the wagon and stood there, taking it in. I know it's not much, Rowan started. It's ours. She turned to him. That's more than most people have. They spent the rest of that first day making the place livable. Rowan hauled water from the creek, while Eliza scrubbed years of dust from the floors. They ate beans and bread for dinner, sitting on the porch as the sun set behind the mountains. No wedding cake, no celebration. Just the two of them, and the sound of the forest settling into night. Tell me something true, Eliza said after a while. Rowan looked at her, firelight from inside catching his profile. About what? About why you asked me to marry you. And don't say love. I know you care about me, but there's something else. Something you're not telling anyone. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, Victor Kane doesn't just want land, Eliza. He wants power, control, and he's willing to destroy anyone who stands in his way. I know that. Do you know he had 3 families driven off their property last year? Do you know the bank foreclosed on them with 24 hours notice? Do you know where those families are now? Eliza felt something cold settle in her stomach. Where? Gone. Just gone. Rowan's hands tightened on the porch railing. Nobody asks questions. Nobody investigates. Kane owns the sheriff, the mayor, half the judges. So people disappear and life goes on. What does this have to do with us? This land, our land, it's part of something bigger. A pattern. Kane's been buying up everything between here and the Northern Territory. But there are a few parcels he can't touch. Legal complications, old claims. And if someone fought him, if someone had proof of what he's really doing, you want to fight him, Eliza understood now. That's why you needed to marry someone he'd underestimate. Someone the town thinks is making a mistake. Rowan turned to face her fully. I needed to marry someone strong enough to survive what's coming. Someone brave enough to stand when everyone else runs. He paused. I chose you because you're the only person I trust with the truth. What truth? Not yet. His voice held something she'd never heard before. Something like fear. When the time comes, I'll tell you everything. But right now, the less you know, the safer you are. That night, Eliza lay awake listening to Rowan's breathing beside her. She'd known marrying him meant hardship. She'd known it meant isolation and struggle. But she hadn't known it meant danger. Real danger. The kind that made families disappear. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt something else entirely. Purpose. The next morning brought their first real test. Eliza was hanging laundry on the line behind the cabin when she heard horses. 3 of them, moving fast. She turned just as they crested the hill. Men in expensive clothes riding expensive animals, completely out of place in the rough country. Rowan appeared from the barn, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Get inside." "No. Eliza, I'm not hiding in my own home." She stayed exactly where she was, clothespins in hand, as the riders approached. The lead man dismounted with a kind of casual arrogance that came from never being told no. "Rowan Hayes?" "That's right." "My name's Jack Mercer. I work for Mr. Kane." He smiled like they were old friends. "He asked me to stop by, make sure you and your new bride were settling in all right." "We're fine." "Good, good." Mercer's eyes drifted to Eliza, lingering just long enough to make her skin crawl. "Pretty wife you got there. Bet she's not used to this kind of life." Rowan moved, subtle but deliberate, putting himself between Mercer and Eliza. "State your business." "Right to it, then." Mercer pulled a paper from his jacket. "Mr. Kane wanted me to deliver this personally. It's an offer, very generous, for your land and any improvements." "Not interested." "You haven't heard the price." "Don't need to." Rowan's voice stayed level, but Eliza saw his hands shift position. Ready. "This land isn't for sale." Mercer's smile disappeared. "You should think carefully before refusing Mr. Kane's generosity. Things can be difficult for people who don't cooperate." "Is that a threat?" "It's a fact." Mercer mounted his horse, the other 2 men following suit. "You've got 1 week to reconsider. After that, well, accidents happen, especially out here where nobody can hear you scream." They rode off, leaving dust and menace in their wake. Eliza waited until they were out of sight. "That wasn't a business offer." "No." Rowan crumpled the paper without reading it. "That was a declaration of war." The week that followed established a pattern that would define their marriage. Rowan worked from dawn until dark, mending fences, clearing land, building a better barn. Hard labor that left him exhausted, but never broken. And twice, maybe 3 times, he'd disappear. "I need to check the northern boundary," he'd say. Or, "Some traps need resetting in the high country." Always a reasonable explanation. Always gone for hours, sometimes overnight. Eliza didn't ask questions at first. She was too busy learning how to survive in isolation. How to make bread without a proper oven. How to preserve meat. How to shoot the rifle Rowan insisted she keep loaded by the door. But on the 8th day, when he returned from another mysterious trip with mud on his boots from terrain that shouldn't exist near their property, she finally confronted him. "Where do you really go?" Rowan was washing at the basin, back to her. "I told you, don't." She moved closer. "Don't lie to me. We're supposed to be partners in this, whatever this is. So tell me the truth." He dried his hands slowly, deliberately. When he turned, his face held that same careful guard. "There are things you're better off not knowing." "You sound like Kane. Like everyone who thinks I'm too fragile to handle reality." "That's not, then prove it." Eliza stood her ground. "Trust me, the way you said you did. Or admit you married me because you needed a convenient cover, not a partner." The words hung between them like a challenge. Rowan's jaw tightened. "You want the truth? Fine. I'm gathering evidence. Records, testimonies, proof of everything Kane has done. But the people who have that information, they're scared. Hiding. I have to meet them in secret, away from anyone who might report back to Kane's men." "Why didn't you just tell me that?" "Because if Kane finds out, he won't just come after me. He'll come after you. And I—" Rowan stopped, something raw crossing his face. "I can't let that happen." "That's not your choice to make." Eliza reached for his hand. I knew marrying you meant risk. I chose it anyway. So either trust me to stand beside you, or let me go before we both get killed for nothing. He looked at their joined hands for a long moment. Then, there's a man named Samuel Porter. He used to keep the land records for the county before Kane had him dismissed. He's living rough now, hiding in the mountains, but he has documents. Proof that Kane falsified deeds, bribed officials. I've been meeting with him, copying what he has. When's the next meeting? Rowan's eyes widened. You can't... When? Tomorrow night.
But Eliza, it's dangerous. The trail is barely passable, and if anyone sees us, then we'll be careful. She squeezed his hand. Together.
The next evening, they rode out as the sun touched the horizon. Rowan led them on a path that seemed to go nowhere, winding between trees and over rocks that didn't look like any trail Eliza had ever seen. The horses picked their way carefully, sure-footed in the growing dark. An hour in, Rowan stopped suddenly. What? Eliza started. He held up a hand, listening. Then she heard it too. Voices. Distant, but getting closer. Someone followed us, Rowan whispered. Or they're patrolling. He turned his horse. We need to go back. What about Porter? He'll wait. You won't survive if Kane's men find you up here. There was no argument in his tone, just fact. Now, Eliza. They made it halfway back before the riders cut them off. 5 men this time, not 3. Jack Mercer in the lead, smile gone completely. Well, well, out for an evening ride? Long way from your cabin, Hayes. Rowan's hand moved toward his rifle. I wouldn't. Mercer gestured, and 2 of his men raised their weapons. We're just here to deliver a message. Mr. Kane's patience has limits. We already told you, Rowan started. Not you. Mercer's eyes locked on Eliza. Her. The world seemed to slow down. Eliza felt Rowan tense beside her, felt the danger crystallize into something real and immediate. Mercer dismounted, walked toward her horse with deliberate casualty. Your husband's making some dangerous choices, Mrs. Hayes. Choices that could get people hurt. You seem like a smart woman. Smart enough to convince him to take Mr. Kane's offer and leave this territory while you still can. And if I don't? Eliza kept her voice steady, despite the fear climbing her spine. Then we'll have to assume you're part of the problem. Mercer reached out, grabbed her horse's bridle.
Pretty thing like you, all alone out here in this rough country? Accidents happen. Animals attack. People get lost. Your father would be heartbroken, don't you think?
Rowan moved his horse forward. Let go of her. Or what? Mercer laughed. You'll shoot me? In front of 5 witnesses? You're not that stupid, Hayes. No. Rowan's voice dropped to something Eliza had never heard before. Something cold and absolute. But I am that patient. And when the time comes, and it will come, you'll wish you'd never touched what's mine. Something in his tone made Mercer release the bridle and step back. For just a second, uncertainty flickered across his face, like he'd seen something in Rowan he hadn't expected. Something dangerous. 1 week, Mercer said, mounting up again. Then things get serious. They rode off, leaving Eliza and Rowan alone in the darkening forest. Neither of them spoke until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely. We need to go home, Rowan finally said. No. Eliza turned her horse back toward the mountain. We need to meet Porter. Eliza, they already know we're up to something. Running now doesn't change that. But getting what we came for might actually give us a chance. She looked at him. You said you trusted me. Prove it. Rowan stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Stay close, and if I say run, You run. No questions. They found Samuel Porter in a cave that looked like nothing from the outside. Inside, by lamplight, Eliza saw a man who'd aged 20 years in what Rowan said was only 2. His hand shook as he spread documents across a makeshift table. Deeds, ledgers, letters signed by officials who'd since disappeared or changed their stories. "This is everything," Porter said, his voice raw. "Everything I managed to save before Kane's men burned the office. But it's not enough. Not without someone willing to present it. Someone the territorial governor would actually listen to."
"We'll find someone," Rowan promised.
"Will you?" Porter looked at Eliza. "You should leave while you can, ma'am. This fight, it's already lost. Kane owns this territory. He owns the law. Fighting him just means dying slower." Eliza thought about the cabin, about the champagne nobody drank, about her father's shame and the town's mockery, about the life everyone expected her to live versus the one she'd chosen. "I didn't marry Rowan to run when things got hard," she said quietly. "And I won't let Kane win just because he's used to getting his way." Porter smiled, sad and knowing. "You're braver than I was." They spent 2 hours copying documents by lamplight, Eliza's hand cramping from the work. When they finally rode back down the mountain, dawn was breaking over the valley. As they approached the cabin, Eliza saw smoke rising from the chimney. Smoke from a fire they hadn't left burning. Rowan pulled up short. "Wait here." "Not a chance." They dismounted together, moving quietly toward the cabin. The door stood slightly ajar, not broken, but definitely open. Rowan pushed it wide, rifle ready, and they stepped inside. The cabin had been searched, not destroyed, but definitely searched. Drawers pulled open, their few belongings scattered, floorboards pried up in places. Whoever did this was looking for something specific. "They know," Eliza whispered. "They know what we're doing." Rowan moved through the cabin, checking each corner. "They suspect. If they knew for certain, they would have taken the documents we already had." He gestured to a loose stone in the fireplace, their hiding spot, still undisturbed. "But they're getting closer." "What do we do?" "We move faster." Rowan started gathering their things, his movements efficient and practiced. "And we stop pretending this is about surviving on a homestead." "What is it about?" He stopped, looked at her directly. "Taking down an empire. And either we do it first, or Kane buries us trying." Eliza felt the weight of that truth settle over her. This was what she'd signed up for when she said yes to this marriage. Not just poverty and isolation, but war. A quiet war, fought in shadows and mountains, where the weapons were documents and testimony instead of guns. Though she suspected, before this was over, they'd need those too. "Then we better win," she said. Rowan's expression shifted into something that might have been pride. "Yeah, we'd better." Over the next 2 weeks, the pressure increased in ways both subtle and direct. Their fences were cut 3 times. Livestock spooked and scattered. Supplies they'd ordered through the general store never arrived, the shopkeeper apologizing, but offering no real explanation. The message was clear: cooperate or suffocate. But Rowan adapted. He taught Eliza to track, to read signs in the forest, to know when they were being watched. They developed a system, coded messages left in specific locations, emergency signals, backup plans for their backup plans. The romantic notion of frontier marriage gave way to something harder and more necessary: tactical partnership. And still, Kane's men kept circling. One afternoon, Eliza rode into town alone, against Rowan's advice, but necessary to maintain appearances. She needed to pick up medicine for a fever that had been plaguing her for days. The general store went quiet when she entered, conversations dying mid-sentence. "Mrs. Hayes,"
The shopkeeper's wife greeted her with forced politeness. "What can I help you with?" "Quinine, and some dried beef if you have it." "Of course." The woman moved toward the shelves, but her hands trembled slightly. "How are you settling in?" "We're managing." Eliza kept her voice neutral, aware of the ears listening. "Thank you for asking." She paid and turned to leave, but found Jack Mercer blocking the doorway. "Mrs. Hayes."
What a pleasant surprise.
"Mr. Mercer, I hope you're well." He stepped aside, letting her pass, but followed her out onto the street. "That fever you're treating must be hard, being so isolated. If you had a house in town, proper medical care, I have everything I need." "Do you?" Mercer's tone shifted. "Because I heard your father's had some financial troubles lately. Banks calling in some debts. Strange timing, don't you think?" Eliza stopped. "What did you just say?" "Just expressing concern. It would be terrible if your family lost everything because of choices you made." Mercer smiled. "But Mr. Kane, he's reasonable. One word from you, convincing your husband to sell, and those debts might just disappear." The calculation was obvious. They couldn't just pressure Rowan, so they'd go after everyone he cared about. Eliza felt rage building in her chest, white-hot and dangerous. "Tell Kane," she said slowly, "that my father made his own choices, and threatening him won't change mine." She walked to her horse, mounted up, and rode out of town without looking back. But her hands shook on the reins the entire way home. Rowan was waiting on the porch when she arrived. One look at her face, and he knew. "What happened?" She told him everything. About Mercer, about her father's debts, about the threat wrapped in false concern. "They're escalating," Rowan said quietly. "Faster than I expected." "Can Kane actually do that? Destroy my father financially?" "He owns the bank. He can do whatever he wants." Rowan helped her down from the horse. "The question is whether we let him." "What choice do we have?" Instead of answering, Rowan took her hand and led her into the cabin. From beneath the floorboards, he pulled out a leather satchel she'd never seen before. Inside were more documents, maps, something that looked like surveyor's notes. "I haven't been completely honest with you," he said, "about what I'm really doing up in those mountains." Eliza's heart began to pound. "Tell me." "Kane thinks he's building an empire, but empires need land, and land needs to be properly claimed, legal, defensible." Rowan spread one of the maps across the table. "He's been falsifying surveys, moving boundary markers, claiming territory that legally belongs to someone else, including about 4,000 acres that—" He stopped, meeting her eyes. "That what?" Eliza pressed. "That's mine. Has been for 6 years. I bought it from the original homesteaders before Kane started his expansion. Paid fair price, have the deed registered with the territorial government, not just the local courthouse." Rowan's expression held something she couldn't quite read. "That cabin we're living in? It's not our actual home. It's a decoy." The world tilted. "What?" "The real ranch is 12 miles north, hidden in a valley Kane hasn't found yet. 70 head of cattle, good water."
Pasture land that could support 3 times that number.
He paused. "I've been building something, Eliza. Something worth protecting. But to protect it, I had to let everyone believe I was just another broke cowboy trying to scratch out a living." "Why didn't you tell me this before we got married?" "Because if you'd known, your reactions wouldn't have been genuine. Kane's smart. He watches people. If you'd known we were actually wealthy, actually powerful, he would have seen it, would have suspected something." Rowan's voice held regret. "I needed you to believe the lie,
so everyone else would too. Eliza sank into a chair, trying to process it all. The poverty was fake. The weakness was performance. Everything she'd endured, the mockery, the isolation, the fear, it was all part of a larger plan she hadn't been trusted enough to know about. "Say something," Rowan said quietly.
I don't know what to say.
Eliza looked at the maps, the documents, the evidence of a life she'd never seen. "You let me think we were barely surviving. You let me worry about winter, about whether we'd have enough food." "I know, and I'm sorry. But Eliza, if Kane discovers what I really have, he won't just threaten us. He'll bring everything he has to take it. The only reason we're still alive is because he thinks we're not worth the effort yet."
And when he finds out the truth?
Rowan's jaw tightened. "That's why we have to move first. That's why I've been gathering evidence, building alliances, preparing. When we finally reveal what we know, when we show the territorial governor what Kane's really been doing, we need to have enough power behind us that he can't just make us disappear." Eliza stood, walked to the window, looked out at the forest that had become her world. Everything she believed about her life here was a carefully constructed fiction. And Rowan, the man she'd married, the man she'd trusted, he'd been the architect of that fiction. But she also understood why.
"If we're going to do this," she said finally, turning back to face him, "if we're going to fight Kane and win, then no more secrets. No more protecting me by keeping me in the dark. I need to know everything. All of it."
Rowan nodded slowly. "Agreed."
"Good."
Eliza moved to the table, studied the maps with new eyes.
"Then start talking. I want to know about this hidden ranch. I want to know who else is involved. I want to know exactly what we're up against and what we need to do to survive it."
For the first time since their wedding, Rowan smiled. Really smiled. "You sure you're ready for that?"
"I married a poor cowboy everyone said was worthless," Eliza said. "Turns out, I married something much more dangerous. So yes, I'm ready. The question is whether you're ready to actually let me be your partner instead of just your cover."
Rowan began to speak, laying out details that made her head spin. Names of people hiding throughout the territory, evidence caches, plans within plans. And through it all, one truth became crystal clear. They weren't just fighting to survive. They were fighting to win. And somewhere up in those mountains, hidden from the world, was the weapon they needed to do it. The map stayed spread across the table for 3 days, while Rowan explained everything he'd been building in the shadows. And Eliza realized just how deeply she'd underestimated the man she married.
"Samuel Porter isn't the only one helping us," Rowan said on the second night, pointing to names written in careful script along the margins of a surveyor's map. "There's a federal land agent named Thompson who's been documenting Kane's fraudulent claims for 2 years. A judge in the territorial capital who lost his brother to one of Kane's accidents.
Even a few of Kane's former men who grew tired of being part of something corrupt." "How many people know about the ranch?" 5, 6 now, counting you." Rowan traced a line on the map that showed a hidden pass through the mountains. "Everyone who works there thinks I'm just another rancher trying to stay off Kane's radar. They don't know about the evidence gathering, don't know we're preparing for war." "Why keep it from them?" "Because the fewer people who know the full truth, the fewer targets Kane has." Rowan looked up, his eyes serious. "And because if this goes wrong, I need them to have plausible deniability. They're just ranch hands, just workers. Nothing Kane can use against them." Eliza studied the map, memorizing the landmarks. "When do I get to see it?" "Soon, but not yet. Right now, Kane thinks you're just a desperate woman who married beneath her station. That perception keeps you safe."
"I don't want to be safe. I want to be useful."
You already are. Rowan covered her hand with his. Kane's watching me constantly, but you can move through town, talk to people, gather information he'd never suspect you're collecting. That's more valuable than you know. So that became their new rhythm. Rowan would disappear for days at a time, claiming he was hunting or checking trap lines, while Eliza played the role of the struggling frontier wife with increasing skill. She'd ride into Silver Creek once a week, buying minimal supplies, letting people see her worn dress and tired eyes. She'd listen to gossip in the general store, note which families were suddenly prospering and which were being squeezed. She'd smile politely at the women who used to be her friends and swallow the comments about her poor life choices. And she'd report everything back to Rowan. Kane bought the Morrison property, she told him after one such trip. Paid 3 times what it's worth, but only after the bank called in their loan early. Mrs. Morrison said they had no choice. Rowan added it to his records. That makes 12 forced sales in 6 months. The pattern's getting clearer. Clear enough to take to the territorial governor? Not yet. We need something undeniable, something that ties Kane directly to the fraud, not just his intermediaries. Rowan's frustration showed in the tight set of his jaw. He's too careful, always keeps himself one step removed from the actual crimes. But Kane's careful distance didn't stop his men from getting more aggressive. It started small. Supplies that went missing from their barn, tools that disappeared overnight. Then it escalated. One morning, Eliza found their water barrels contaminated with something that made her violently sick for 2 days. Another time, someone shot their pack horse while it was grazing near the creek, leaving it to bleed out slowly where Eliza would find it. They're trying to break us down, Rowan said, burying the horse with grim efficiency. Wear us out with small attacks until we're too exhausted to fight back. It's working. Eliza hated admitting it, but the constant vigilance was draining her. I can't sleep anymore. Every sound makes me reach for the rifle. I know, Rowan paused in his digging, and I'm sorry. If I'd known it would get this bad, you'd have what? Not married me? Not tried to fight Kane? Eliza shook her head. I chose this, Rowan. I just need to know it's going somewhere. That we're not just surviving attacks until he finally decides to kill us. We're close, I promise. Just a few more pieces and we'll have everything we need. But close wasn't fast enough. 3 days later, Eliza rode into town to find her father waiting outside the general store. He looked like he'd aged a decade since the wedding. Face gaunt, clothes that used to fit hanging loose on his frame. Eliza, his voice cracked on her name. Father. She dismounted, keeping her distance. I heard about the bank calling your loans. They gave me 30 days. After 20 years of business with them, 30 days. He stepped closer, and she could smell whiskey on his breath. This is because of you, because of that cowboy you married. This is because of Victor Kane. Don't pretend otherwise. Kane offered to help. Her father's voice rose, drawing attention. He said if you'd just convince Rowan to sell, if you'd come back home where you belong, he'd clear my debts. All of them. And you believed him? What choice do I have? I'll lose everything, Eliza. The house, the business, everything your mother and I built. Tears ran down his face, shameless and desperate. Please, you're my daughter. Help me. Eliza felt something crack inside her chest. This was the man who'd raised her, who'd taught her to read, who'd once promised she'd never want for anything. But it was also the man who'd tried to sell her to the highest bidder, who'd laughed at her wedding, who'd chosen his pride over his principles. I can't help you, she said quietly. Not the way you want. Then you're killing me. You know that, don't you? You're choosing that worthless cowboy over your own father's life. I'm choosing truth over convenience, something you should have done years ago.
She turned back to her horse. "Eliza, wait!" But she didn't wait. She couldn't. If she stayed, if she listened to him beg, she might actually break. And she couldn't afford to break. Not now. She made it halfway home before the tears came, hard and angry and full of grief for the father she'd thought she had, versus the one who actually existed. When she finally reached the cabin, Rowan took one look at her face and pulled her into his arms without a word. She cried against his chest until there was nothing left, until the anger burned itself out and left only exhausted acceptance. "He's going to lose everything," she finally said. "And part of me wants to save him anyway." "I know. But I can't, because saving him means letting Kane win." "I know that too." Rowan held her tighter. "And I'm sorry you have to make that choice." "Are you?" Eliza pulled back to look at him. "Because sometimes I think you planned this. Knew Kane would go after my family. Knew it would force me to choose sides completely." Rowan's expression went carefully blank. "You think I'd use your father as bait?" "I think you'd do whatever it takes to win. Same as Kane, just with better intentions." The accusation hung between them, sharp and dangerous. For a long moment, Rowan didn't respond. Then he stepped back, creating distance. "You're right," he said quietly. "I knew Kane would pressure anyone connected to me. I knew marrying you would put your family at risk. And I married you anyway because I needed someone he'd underestimate, someone whose suffering would make the disguise believable." He met her eyes. "So yes, Eliza, I used you. And I'd apologize, except we both know I'd make the same choice again if it meant stopping Kane." The honesty hit harder than any lie could have. Eliza wanted to rage at him, wanted to mount her horse and ride away from all of this, the danger, the manipulation, the impossible moral calculations. But she also understood why he'd done it. Understood that sometimes winning required sacrifices that left scars. "Don't ever lie to me again," she said. "Not even to protect me. If we're doing this, we do it as equals. Agreed?" Rowan nodded slowly. Agreed. They stood there in the fading light, two people who'd chosen each other for complicated reasons and were now bound by something deeper than either had anticipated. It wasn't love exactly. Not yet. But it was partnership forged in fire, and that counted for something. "I need to go north tomorrow," Rowan said after a while. "Thompson sent word. He found something in the Territorial Land Office. Documents Kane thought were destroyed." "How long will you be gone?" 2 days. Maybe 3. He hesitated. "You could come with me this time. See the ranch. Meet the people who work there." Eliza shook her head. "Not yet. Someone needs to stay here, maintain the appearance that we're barely hanging on. Besides, if I suddenly disappear for 3 days, Kane will notice." "He's already noticing. His men were asking questions in town last week about where I go when I leave." "Then we need to be more careful." Eliza moved toward the cabin. "Go get your documents. I'll manage things here." Rowan caught her arm gently. "If anything happens while I'm gone, if Kane's men come around, I'll handle it." She patted the rifle leaning against the doorframe.
"I'm not the same woman you married 3 months ago."
"No." Something like pride crossed his face. "You're not." He left before dawn, disappearing into the mountains the way he always did. Eliza spent the morning doing chores, very aware of how exposed the cabin was, how vulnerable she'd be if Kane decided to escalate while Rowan was gone. By afternoon, her nerves were stretched tight enough to snap. Which is probably why she didn't notice the riders until they were already in the yard. 5 men this time, including Jack Mercer. But there was someone new with them, a woman in expensive riding clothes who sat her horse like she owned the world. "Mrs. Hayes," Mercer tipped his hat with exaggerated politeness.
Allow me to introduce Mrs. Catherine Kane, Mr. Kane's wife. Eliza's mind raced. She'd never met Catherine Kane, had only heard rumors. Some said she was a saint, others a manipulator worse than her husband. Looking at the woman now, perfectly composed, eyes calculating, Eliza suspected the truth was somewhere in between. Mrs. Kane, Eliza kept her hands visible, away from the rifle. What brings you out here? Concern, Catherine dismounted with practiced grace. May I come inside? I'd prefer to speak privately. Every instinct screamed trap, but refusing would seem suspicious. Of course. Inside the cabin, Catherine looked around with what seemed like genuine sympathy. This must be quite an adjustment from your father's house. I manage. I'm sure you do. You always struck me as resourceful. Catherine settled into the only decent chair without being invited. I'll be direct, Mrs. Hayes. My husband is planning something that will hurt many people, including you. I'd like to prevent that, if possible. Why would you work against your own husband? Because Victor's ambition has become dangerous, even to him. Catherine's mask slipped just enough to show real fear beneath. He's making enemies in the territorial government, taking risks that could destroy everything we've built. And he won't listen to reason anymore. What does this have to do with me? Your husband is gathering evidence against Victor. Don't bother denying it. We've known for months. But what you may not know is that Victor plans to eliminate that threat permanently within the week. Catherine leaned forward. He's bringing in men from Denver, professional killers, not the local hired hands you've dealt with so far. They'll make it look like an accident or a robbery gone wrong, but the result will be the same. You and Rowan will be dead. Eliza's blood went cold. You're lying. Am I? Why else would I be here, risking my husband's anger by warning you? Catherine stood, moved to the window. I'm offering you a way out. There's a stage leaving from Silverton in 4 days. I can arrange tickets, money, everything you'd need to start over somewhere Victor can't reach you. In exchange, you convince your husband to destroy whatever evidence he's gathered and disappear. You want us to run? I want you to survive. There's a difference. Catherine turned back. Victor is going to win this fight, Mrs. Hayes. He always does. The only question is whether you're smart enough to accept that and walk away while you still can. Eliza studied the woman carefully. If you really wanted to help, you'd testify against him. Give us the evidence we need to bring him down legally. And lose everything I have? My home? My security? My position in society? Catherine laughed, but it held no humor. I'm not that brave. I'm just practical enough to know that some fights aren't worth winning. Then we have nothing more to discuss. You're making a mistake. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make. Eliza moved toward the door. Thank you for the warning, Mrs. Kane. I'll consider it carefully. Catherine paused on her way out. He'll kill you, you know.
Without hesitation or remorse. That's who my husband is.
I know exactly who he is. Eliza met her eyes. The question is whether you're brave enough to admit it matters. After they left, Eliza barred the door and sank against it, trying to process everything. Professional killers. Within the week. She needed to warn Rowan, but he was 2 days' ride away, with no way to contact him quickly. She could run, take Catherine's offer and disappear. Or she could stay and hope Rowan made it back before Kane's men arrived. She chose a third option. The next morning, Eliza rode into Silver Creek and went directly to the sheriff's office. The sheriff was Kane's man through and through, but she had to try the legitimate route before resorting to anything else. Sheriff Dawson, I need to report a threat." Dawson barely looked up from his paperwork. "What kind of threat?" "Victor Kane is planning to have my husband and me killed. His wife told me yesterday." "Now hold on."
Dawson set down his pen. "You're saying Mrs. Kane admitted her husband's planning murder? She warned me about hired killers coming from Denver." "Uh-huh. And you have proof of this?" "Her word. My testimony." Dawson leaned back, studying her with open skepticism. "Mrs. Hayes, I'm going to be straight with you. You come in here with a wild story about one of the most respected men in this territory, backing it up with nothing but your say-so, and you expect me to do what exactly?" "Investigate. Protect us. Your job." "My job is to maintain order and enforce the law, not chase down paranoid fantasies from desperate women whose husbands are failing at homesteading." He stood, dismissive. "Now, unless you have actual evidence of an actual crime, I suggest you go home." "And when we turn up dead?" "Then I'll investigate that. But right now, all I see is a woman trying to cause trouble for a man who's done nothing but contribute to this community." Dawson opened the door. "Good day, Mrs. Hayes." Eliza left feeling fury burn through her veins. She'd known it was unlikely, but some part of her had hoped, stupidly, naively hoped, that the law might actually matter, that someone might care about justice more than power. She was loading supplies when she heard her name. "Eliza." She turned to find Thomas Brennan, a boy, no, a young man now, she'd known since childhood. He worked at the bank, kept his head down, avoided trouble. But something in his expression made her pause. "Thomas, I heard what you told the sheriff." He glanced around nervously. "It's true, about Kane bringing in hired guns. I saw the telegrams." "You work for Kane's bank. Why are you telling me this?" "Because my sister was married to one of the men whose land Kane stole. Her husband tried to fight it legally, and he ended up dead in a riding accident that everybody knew wasn't an accident." Thomas's hands shook. "I can't stop Kane. I'm nobody." "But I can give you a chance to prepare." "When are they arriving?"
3 days from now, maybe 4. They're supposed to look like cattle buyers, but I saw the expense coded to problem resolution." He pressed a folded paper into her hand. "Names, physical descriptions, everything I could copy without being noticed." Eliza wanted to hug him, but knew it would draw attention.
"Thank you."
"Don't thank me. Just survive. And if you ever get the chance to hurt Kane the way he's hurt others, take it." Thomas walked away quickly, disappearing into the crowd. Back at the cabin, Eliza spread the information Thomas had given her across the table. 3 men, all with reputations for making problems disappear. Arriving in 3 days, and Rowan wouldn't be back for at least 2. She had maybe 48 hours to figure out how to survive without him. The answer came to her slowly, piece by piece. She couldn't fight 3 professional killers alone. But she didn't have to fight them alone. She had something they didn't expect: knowledge of the terrain, preparation time, and the kind of desperation that made people dangerous. She spent the rest of that day setting traps. Not the kind meant to kill. She wasn't ready for that. Wasn't sure she could be. But the kind meant to slow down, to warn, to give her precious seconds of advantage. She moved the rifle ammunition to 3 different locations, so she could never be disarmed completely. She prepared an escape route through the back window, practiced it until she could do it in complete darkness. She wrote down everything she knew about Kane's operation, and hid copies in locations only Rowan would think to check. If they killed her, at least the evidence would survive. On the second night, alone in the cabin with a rifle across her lap, Eliza realized she wasn't scared anymore. The fear had burned itself out, leaving something harder and colder in its place.
Kane thought he could break her by taking away everything that made her soft. He was wrong. He was just teaching her how to fight without mercy.
The third morning brought Rowan home early, riding hard and looking like he hadn't slept. He took one look at the cabin's fortified state and understood immediately. What happened? She told him everything. Catherine's visit, the sheriff's dismissal, Thomas's warning, the killers who'd be arriving within 24 hours. Rowan listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail. When she finished, he moved through the cabin, checking her preparations, making small adjustments. Then he faced her directly. We're leaving. Tonight. To run? To fight smart instead of fighting desperate. He started gathering their essential documents. I can get us to the ranch before they track us. Once we're there, we have numbers, defensive positions, and the ability to move to higher ground they can't reach on horseback.
And the cabin? We let them have it. It's not our real home anyway, remember? Just a decoy. Rowan paused. Unless you've changed your mind. Unless you want to take Catherine Kane's offer and disappear. Eliza looked around the cabin one last time. At the place where she'd learned to be someone stronger than the girl who'd walked away from her wedding reception. At the floor where she'd cried over her father's choices. At the table where she'd finally seen the maps that showed her husband's real fight. No, she said. We finish this. Together. Rowan's expression shifted into something fierce and proud. Then pack light and pack fast. We ride in an hour. They moved with practiced efficiency, taking only what they absolutely needed. Documents, ammunition, food that wouldn't spoil. Everything else, the furniture, the supplies, all the trappings of their pretend poverty, they left behind. As the sun set, they stood together in the doorway, looking at the cabin one last time. No regrets? Rowan asked. Eliza thought about the woman she'd been on her wedding day. Thought about the town's mockery and her father's shame and the life everyone expected her to live. Then she thought about the woman she'd become, harder, sharper, more certain of her own strength. Only that we didn't do this sooner, she said. They rode north as darkness fell, following trails only Rowan knew, moving toward a truth he'd been hiding, and a fight they were finally ready to finish. Behind them, the cabin sat empty and exposed, waiting for killers who'd find nothing but absence. And ahead, hidden in mountains Kane had never successfully claimed, lay everything they needed to turn the trap around. The mountain pass appeared where it shouldn't exist, a gap between rock faces that looked like solid wall until you were standing directly in front of it. And even then, only if you knew exactly where to look. Rowan dismounted, leading his horse through the narrow opening with Eliza close behind. The passage barely fit them single file, rock scraping against their shoulders, the horses nervous but trusting. Eliza's heart pounded in the confined space, claustrophobia mixing with anticipation. Then the passage opened, and her breath caught. The valley spread out below them like something from a dream she'd never dared to have. Even in darkness, lit only by moon and stars, she could see the scope of it. Pastureland rolling toward distant tree lines. Cattle, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, scattered across the grass. Buildings clustered near a creek that caught the moonlight. This wasn't a struggling homestead. This was an empire. "Holy God," Eliza whispered. 6,000 acres, Rowan said quietly. Give or take. The original homesteader filed the claim in 1871, but he couldn't make it work alone. Sold to me in 79 for a price Kane never knew existed. How is this even possible? How did you hide all this? Kane's surveyors never found the pass. They mapped this whole area as impassable rock, worthless for development. And I let them believe it. Rowan started down the slope.
Every person who works here thinks I'm just another rancher who got lucky with a hidden valley. They don't know about the evidence. Don't know about Kane. Don't know we're preparing for war. They rode down toward the main house, a solid structure of timber and stone that made the cabin look like exactly what it was, a deliberate deception. Lights appeared in windows as they approached. By the time they reached the yard, 3 men had emerged, rifles ready, but lowered when they recognized Rowan. "Boss," the oldest one said, a weathered man with gray in his beard. "Wasn't expecting you back for another 2 days." "Plans changed, Marcus. This is my wife, Eliza." Marcus's eyes widened slightly. "The wife you said existed, but nobody'd met? Well, I'll be damned." He touched his hat respectfully. "Ma'am, welcome to Hayes Ranch." "Hayes Ranch?" Eliza looked at Rowan. "You named it after yourself?" "After my grandfather, technically. He was the one who taught me that sometimes you have to hide in plain sight to survive." Rowan helped her dismount. "Marcus, we've got trouble coming. Kane's sending hired killers to the cabin. They'll find it empty, which means they'll start tracking us." Marcus's expression hardened. "How long do we have?" "Day, maybe 2 if we're lucky. I need everyone armed and ready. Double the watch on the pass. Anyone comes through who isn't one of ours, we need to know immediately." "Consider it done." Marcus turned to the other men, issuing rapid instructions. Within minutes, the ranch transformed from peaceful to fortified, men moving with the kind of efficiency that spoke of previous emergencies. Inside the house, Eliza finally saw the full extent of what Rowan had been hiding. Comfortable furniture, stocked shelves, a study lined with books and maps and documents organized with military precision. This wasn't just wealth. It was power, carefully accumulated and deliberately concealed. "How long have you been planning this?" she asked. Rowan poured them both whiskey from a crystal decanter that probably cost more than their wedding. "Since the day Kane had my brother killed." The words dropped like stones in still water. Eliza set down her glass. "You never mentioned a brother." "James, older by 3 years. He owned a ranch about 50 miles east of here, had a wife and 2 daughters. Kane wanted his land for railroad access. James refused to sell." Rowan's voice went flat, emotionless in the way that meant he was barely holding together. "They found him at the bottom of a ravine. Broken neck. The sheriff called it a riding accident. Case closed within a week." James's wife got nothing from the land sale because somehow the deed had been transferred to Kane the day before James died. The forgery was obvious, but nobody would investigate. "Where are they now, his wife and daughters?" "Denver. I send them money every month under a false name. Kane doesn't know they exist, and I plan to keep it that way." Rowan drained his whiskey. "That's when I understood that fighting Kane legally wouldn't work. He owns the law. So I started building something he couldn't buy or threaten or steal. Something invisible until I was ready to use it." "And marrying me? Was that part of the plan from the beginning?" "No," he met her eyes. "That was improvisation. Kane started moving faster than I expected, pressuring people I'd been cultivating as allies. I needed cover, needed to seem weak and distracted. A failed marriage to someone from a good family who'd fallen on hard times. That was perfect misdirection." "But you didn't fail." "No," Rowan said softly. "I didn't. You turned out to be the one thing I hadn't planned for." Before Eliza could ask what he meant, Marcus burst through the door. "Boss, we've got a problem. One of the lookouts spotted riders approaching the old cabin. 3 men, just like your wife described. But there's something else." He hesitated. "They've got someone with them. A prisoner." Rowan went very still. "Who?" "Can't tell from this distance, but it's a man. tied to his horse, being forced along. Eliza felt ice form in her stomach.
My father. Kane took my father.
We don't know that, Rowan started.
Yes, we do. It's exactly what he'd do. Use my father as bait to draw us out. And if we don't come, he kills him and blames us for not cooperating.
She was already moving toward the door.
We have to go back.
That's what Kane wants. He's setting a trap.
I know it's a trap, but I can't just let my father die.
Rowan grabbed her arm, not roughly but firmly enough to stop her. If we ride into that trap, we all die, your father included. Is that what you want?
I want to save him.
Then we do it smart. Rowan turned to Marcus. How many men can you spare? 6, maybe 8. But boss, if we're leaving the ranch vulnerable... Kane doesn't know about the ranch yet. Right now, he thinks he's cornering a desperate cowboy and his wife. Let him keep thinking that. Rowan's mind was clearly racing, calculating angles. We go back, but not the way he expects. Not weak and afraid. We go with enough force to turn his trap around. Marcus grinned, fierce and dangerous. Now that sounds like a plan. Within an hour, they were riding back toward the cabin with 8 armed men. Rowan had changed from his work clothes into something Eliza had never seen him wear. Good boots, a coat that actually fit, a gun belt that spoke of practice and competence. He looked like what he actually was, a rancher with resources and the will to use them. When we get there, Rowan explained as they rode, Kane's men will expect us to beg, to negotiate. They'll have the high ground, thinking they control the situation. That's when we show them they're wrong. And my father? We get him out first. That's priority 1. But Eliza, he paused, if your father betrayed us, if he's working with Kane voluntarily, you need to be prepared for that. He wouldn't. He's desperate, and Kane's offering him everything he lost. Don't assume loyalty when survival's at stake. They approached the cabin from the north, using the forest for cover. From their position, Eliza could see the 3 horses tied near the porch, and a 4th with a slumped figure in the saddle. Even from a distance, she recognized her father's coat. He's alive, she whispered. For now, Rowan confirmed. Marcus, take 4 men and circle around to the east. When I give the signal, close in. Don't shoot unless they do, but make it clear we're not alone and we're not afraid. Marcus nodded and disappeared into the trees with half their force. Rowan waited 5 minutes, letting them get into position. Then he rode forward, Eliza and the remaining men flanking him. The response was immediate. The cabin door opened, and Jack Mercer stepped out, gun drawn but lowered. Behind him came 2 men Eliza didn't recognize. Hard faces, professional stances, exactly what she'd expected from hired killers. "Well, well," Mercer called out. "Hayes, I was starting to think you'd run." "And disappoint you? Never." Rowan stopped 50 feet from the cabin, far enough to react, but close enough to talk. "Let the old man go, Mercer. This is between you and me." "See, that's where you're wrong. Mr. Kane says this is about choices, consequences." Mercer gestured to Eliza's father. "This man's daughter made a choice to defy Mr. Kane. Now he pays the price." Eliza's father lifted his head. Even from a distance, she could see the bruises, the blood on his face. "Eliza, don't! They'll kill you too!" One of the hired men hit him, casual and brutal. Her father slumped again. Rowan's hand went to his gun, but Eliza touched his arm. "Not yet." "Here's how this works," Mercer continued. "You sign over the deed to your land. All of it, including whatever you're hiding up in those mountains. Yeah, we know you've got something up there. You sign it over, and we let you both ride out of here alive. You refuse, and we start with the old man. Make you watch while he begs." "And you think I'll believe you'll actually let us go?" Does it matter? You're outgunned and outplayed. Best you can hope for is saving someone. Mercer smiled. So what's it going to be, Hayes? Your pride or her father's life? That's when Rowan did something Eliza didn't expect. He laughed. Not nervous laughter, not bitter.
Genuine amusement, like Mercer had just told the funniest joke he'd ever heard.
What's so damn funny? Mercer demanded. You, standing there thinking you're in control, thinking you've got me cornered. Rowan's laughter faded into something colder. You poor, stupid bastard. You have no idea what you just walked into. Big talk from a man who's about to watch his father-in-law die. Is it? Rowan raised his voice slightly. Marcus, you in position? Yes, sir, came the reply from the trees to the east, close enough to make Mercer spin around. Other voices called out from different directions, west, south, north, surrounding the cabin completely. What the hell? Mercer's gun came up, but he was looking at 8 rifles now, all pointed at him and his men. Here's what's actually happening, Rowan said, his voice carrying absolute authority. You rode onto my land thinking you were hunting prey. But you're not hunters, Mercer. You're trespassers.
And this isn't Kane's territory. It's mine.
One of the hired killers made a move for his weapon. 2 rifles cracked simultaneously, and he went down screaming, shot through both shoulders with precision that said these weren't farmers playing at defense. Next one goes for the head, Rowan said calmly. Your choice. Mercer's face had gone white. Kane will what? Come after me himself? Let him try. Rowan dismounted, walked toward the cabin with absolute confidence. You tell your boss that I'm done hiding, done pretending to be something I'm not. And you tell him that the evidence I've been gathering? It's already on its way to the territorial governor. Sealed testimony from 12 witnesses. Documents proving fraud, theft, and murder. The only question now is whether Kane runs or faces trial. You're bluffing. Am I? Ask yourself why I'm standing here in the open instead of begging for mercy.
Ask yourself why I've got 8 armed men who follow my orders without question. Ask yourself what kind of man could hide an entire ranch from Kane's surveyors for 6 years. Rowan stopped directly in front of Mercer. I'm not the victim in this story. I never was. I was just patient. Mercer's gun wavered. Even if that's true, even if you sent evidence to the Capitol, Kane has friends everywhere. He'll make it disappear. Not this time. Because one of those friends you're counting on? Judge Morrison? His brother was one of the men Kane had killed. He's been waiting for someone brave enough to bring charges. Rowan's voice dropped. I sent the evidence 3 days ago. By now, federal marshals are already on their way. Kane's empire is over. The only question is, how many people go down with him? Eliza watched the truth sink into Mercer's expression. The realization that he'd been working for a man whose power was already crumbling. That he'd risked everything for wages that would never be paid.
Cut the old man loose, Rowan ordered. Mercer hesitated, then nodded to one of his men. Eliza's father was freed from the horse, stumbling as he tried to stand. Eliza ran to him, catching him before he fell. I'm sorry, her father whispered. I'm so sorry. They said they'd kill me if I didn't. They said you'd sell to save me. It's okay. It's over now. Eliza held him, feeling how much weight he'd lost, how much fear had aged him. You're safe. But Rowan wasn't done. Mercer, you've got 2 choices. You can ride back to Kane and tell him everything I just told you. Watch him panic. Watch him try to run. Watch the law catch up to him eventually. Or, he paused, you can tell me everything you know about Kane's operation. Names, locations, crimes you witnessed. Do that, and when the marshals arrive, I'll make sure they know you cooperated.
You want me to turn on Kane?
I want you to choose whether you drown with him or swim to shore. Either way, he's going under." Mercer looked at his wounded companion, bleeding and groaning in the dirt. Looked at the rifle still trained on him. Looked at Rowan, standing there with the confidence of someone who'd already won and was just waiting for everyone else to catch up. "What do you want to know?" Mercer asked quietly. For the next hour, Mercer talked about properties Kane had seized illegally, about officials he'd bribed, about the 3 families who'd disappeared after refusing to sell, about the bank accounts where the stolen money was hidden, about Catherine Kane's role, not as innocent as she'd pretended, but not as guilty as her husband either. Rowan's men documented everything, taking notes with the kind of thoroughness that spoke of legal preparation. This wasn't revenge. This was evidence. "There's one more thing," Mercer said finally.
Kane knows about your brother, about James. He knew what really happened.
Rowan went very still. "Explain."
Kane didn't order it directly. He had a man named Sutton handle it. Sutton's the one who sabotaged your brother's saddle, made sure the horse would spook at exactly the right spot. Mercer swallowed hard. "Sutton's dead now. Died in a fire last year. But Kane kept records of the payment, proof he ordered it. I saw the ledger." "Where?" "His office, hidden safe behind the portrait of his father. Combination is his wedding anniversary, April 14th, 1876. Rowan's hands had curled into fists, knuckles white with tension. Eliza could see him fighting for control, fighting the rage that wanted to ride straight to Kane's house and end this with bullets instead of law. "Thank you," Rowan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's everything I needed." "What happens now?" Mercer asked. "Now you ride to the territorial capital. You find Judge Morrison and you tell him everything you just told me. He'll place you in protective custody until the trial." Rowan gestured to Marcus. "Give him a horse and supplies. Make sure he gets to Denver safely." After Mercer left, escorted by 2 of Rowan's men, an almost eerie quiet settled over the cabin. The wounded hired man had been bandaged and sent on his way with a warning to leave the territory entirely. The 3rd man had disappeared during the confrontation, probably running to Kane with news that his plan had failed spectacularly. Eliza's father sat on the cabin steps, head in his hands. "I should have trusted you," he said to Eliza. "Should have believed you knew what you were doing." "You were scared. Kane's good at exploiting that." "I was a coward." He looked up at Rowan. "And you're not what I thought. Not at all." "No," Rowan agreed. "But that was the point. Kane underestimated me because I let him. Let everyone. It's easier to fight when people think you're already beaten." "What happens now?" Eliza's father asked. "Kane still has resources, still has men loyal to him. Even with marshals coming, he could run," Rowan finished. "Leave the territory, start over somewhere else. That's what I'm counting on him trying." Eliza understood immediately. "You want him to run, because if he runs, he admits guilt, proves everything we've accused him of, and the marshals will chase him across every border until they catch him." Rowan's smile held no warmth. Kane spent years building an image of respectability. The moment he abandons that, he loses everything that protected him. He becomes just another criminal, running from justice. "And if he doesn't run? If he stays and fights?" "Then we have enough evidence to convict him 10 times over. Either way, he loses." Rowan turned to Marcus. "Get everyone back to the ranch. I want full defensive positions maintained until we hear from Denver. Kane's going to lash out when he realizes what's happening, and I don't want casualties." As Marcus gathered the men, Eliza walked to the edge of the property,
looking out at the forest where she'd spent months thinking she was barely surviving. Rowan joined her, standing close but not touching.
"You planned all this," she said. "Every move, every contingency. You knew exactly how Kane would react."
Not exactly, but close enough. He paused. I'm sorry I lied to you. Sorry I made you live in poverty when I had the resources to give you more. Sorry I put your father at risk.
Are you really sorry? Or are you just saying what I want to hear?
Rowan considered that. I'm sorry it had to be that way. But I'm not sorry it worked. Does that make me a bad person?
No, Eliza said slowly. It makes you a person who understands that sometimes good people have to do hard things to stop evil ones.
You don't hate me for using you? I married you knowing you had secrets. I chose to trust you, despite not knowing everything. She turned to face him. But from now on, no more secrets. We're partners, or we're nothing.
Partners, Rowan agreed. He held out his hand. Eliza took it, sealing the bargain. But as they stood there in the fading light, she saw something that made her blood freeze. Smoke, rising from the direction of town. Too much smoke for cooking fires or fireplaces. Rowan! He followed her gaze and cursed. Kane's burning evidence, destroying anything that could be used against him. Or he's burning the town, punishing them for our resistance. They stared at the smoke for a long moment, both understanding what it meant. Kane wasn't running. He was scorching earth, destroying everything he couldn't control. And that made him infinitely more dangerous than a man trying to escape.
We need to go, Eliza said. People could be dying.
It's what he wants.
Draw us out. Catch us in the open. I don't care what he wants. We can't just watch Silver Creek burn.
Rowan's jaw tightened. Then he nodded.
Marcus, get every man who can ride. We're going to town. Now.
They mounted up, riding hard toward the smoke and whatever nightmare Kane had unleashed. Eliza's mind raced with horrible possibilities. The general store in flames, families trapped, children screaming. But as they got closer, she realized the smoke wasn't coming from the residential area. It was coming from Kane's bank. They arrived to find half the town gathered in the street, watching the building burn with a mixture of horror and something that looked almost like satisfaction. The fire was too hot, too complete to be accidental. This was deliberate destruction. "He's inside!" someone shouted. "Kane's still inside!" Eliza pushed through the crowd to the front, where she could see the bank's entrance fully engulfed. The heat was intense even from 50 feet away.
No one could survive in there.
"Did anyone see him go in?" Rowan demanded. "I did." Thomas Brennan stepped forward, his face soot-stained. "He came running about an hour ago, started pulling files, throwing them in a pile. When I asked what he was doing, he pulled a gun on me, told me to get out. I ran, and 10 minutes later the whole place was burning." "Anyone else inside?" "No, I was the last employee here. Everyone else had already gone home." Rowan studied the burning building with calculating eyes. The safe, the one in his office, the evidence about my brother. It would survive a fire like this, wouldn't it? "The safe's fireproof," Thomas confirmed. "Built to withstand anything. Whatever's in there will still be intact when the fire burns out." A horse came thundering up the street, one of Kane's men, looking wild-eyed and desperate. "Mrs. Kane!" he shouted. "Where's Mrs. Kane?" "What about her?" someone asked. "She's missing. Hasn't been seen since this morning." Kane was screaming about her betraying him, about her running to the authorities. The man stopped, seeming to realize he was confessing too much. But it was too late. Catherine Kane had turned on her husband, probably gone to the territorial capital herself to testify. That would explain Kane's desperate destruction of evidence. His wife, his partner in building the empire, had become the witness who could destroy him most completely. And Kane, cornered and furious, had burned his own bank rather than let anyone else have his secrets. The building collapsed inward with a roar, sending sparks into the night sky. The crowd gasped and stepped back. Eliza watched the flames consume everything Kane had built, everything he'd stolen and claimed as his own. "He's dead," her father said quietly, appearing at her side. "Has to be. Nobody survives that." But Rowan shook his head. "No body, no proof. Don't assume anything with Kane."
As if summoned by the words, a figure appeared on the edge of the crowd. Victor Kane, soot-covered and wild-eyed, holding a gun. His expensive suit was singed, his hair disheveled, his face that of a man who'd lost everything and had nothing left to lose. "You," he said, pointing the gun at Rowan. "You did this. You destroyed me." The crowd scattered, people diving for cover. But Rowan stood his ground, Eliza beside him. Marcus and the ranch hands fanned out, weapons ready, but not drawn. "I didn't destroy you, Kane," Rowan said calmly. "You destroyed yourself. I just made sure everyone saw what you really were." "My wife, my business, my reputation, everything I built, gone because of you." "Everything you stole," Rowan corrected. "Everyone you killed. Every family you destroyed to build your empire. That's what's catching up to you now, not me. Justice." Kane's gun hand shook. "There is no justice, only power, and I still have enough to take you down with me." He raised the weapon, aiming at Rowan's chest. Time seemed to slow. Eliza saw the finger tightening on the trigger, saw the hatred in Kane's eyes, saw the moment when he decided one last murder was worth his own damnation. Then a shot rang out. But it wasn't Kane's gun that fired. Kane stumbled backward, blood spreading across his shoulder. The gun fell from his hand. He collapsed to his knees, staring in shock at the person who'd shot him. Catherine Kane stood 20 feet away, still holding her husband's own rifle. Tears ran down her face, but her hands were steady. "I tried to warn them," she said, her voice breaking. "Tried to give them a chance to run. But you wouldn't stop. You never stop." She lowered the rifle. "I loved you once, Victor, before the ambition poisoned everything. But I can't let you kill anyone else, not even to save yourself." Kane stared at her, betrayal and disbelief warring in his expression. Then he started laughing, bitter, broken laughter that turned into coughing. Blood flecked his lips. "You shot me. My own wife." "I stopped you from committing murder in front of 200 witnesses. That's all I did." Catherine's voice hardened. "Now you'll face trial like everyone else. No more running. No more hiding behind money and influence. Just you and your crimes and the truth." Marshals' badges glinted in the firelight as federal officers emerged from the crowd. They'd been there all along, Eliza realized, waiting for Kane to make his move, documenting everything. "Victor Kane," the lead marshal said, "you're under arrest for fraud, theft, conspiracy to commit murder, and about 20 other charges we'll read to you on the way to Denver." As they hauled Kane to his feet, he looked at Rowan one last time. "How long?" he asked. "How long have you been planning this?" 6 years, Rowan said simply. "Since the day you killed my brother." Every move, every choice, every moment of seeming weakness, all of it was leading here. Kane's expression shifted from rage to something almost like respect. "You're better at this than I ever was." "No," Rowan corrected. "I'm just willing to be patient. And I never forgot that power built on other people's suffering can't last. You did." They led Kane away, leaving Eliza and Rowan standing in front of the burning bank, surrounded by people who'd spent months mocking their marriage
and were now seeing the truth of what that marriage had accomplished. The silence stretched out, heavy with revelation. Finally, the mayor cleared his throat. "Mr. Hayes, I believe we owe you an apology." "Several apologies," someone else added. "And probably a lot more than that." Rowan looked at them all, the people who'd laughed at his wedding, who'd called him worthless, who'd believed Kane's lies because it was easier than fighting. "You don't owe me anything. But you owe yourselves the truth. Kane couldn't have done what he did without everyone looking the other way, without people choosing comfort over courage." "And what about you?" the mayor asked. "What happens now that Kane's gone?" Rowan glanced at Eliza, something unreadable in his expression. Then he turned back to the crowd. "Now we rebuild. Restore the land he stole. Help the families he destroyed. And make sure this never happens again." As the crowd dispersed and the marshals finished securing the scene, Eliza's father approached them one more time. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said to Eliza. "But I want you to know, I'm proud of you. Proud of your strength, your courage. Everything I failed to be."
"You're still my father," Eliza said quietly. "That hasn't changed."
"But I have. Watching you stand up to Kane when I was too weak to do it myself, it changed something." He looked at Rowan. "Take care of her. She deserves better than what I gave her." "She deserves everything," Rowan agreed.
"And that's what I plan to give her." After her father left, Eliza and Rowan stood together watching the bank burn itself out, the flames finally dying to embers. Around them, the town was already starting to process what had happened, already beginning to understand how their silence had enabled Kane's cruelty. "It's not over, is it?" Eliza said. "Kane will have lawyers. There'll be a trial. More fighting."
"Yes," Rowan admitted.
"But the hard part's done. The truth is out. The rest is just formality." "What about us? What happens to us now that we don't have to pretend anymore?"
Rowan turned to face her fully. "That's up to you. We married as part of a plan. That plan's over. If you want to walk away, if you want a different life—"
"Stop!" Eliza interrupted. "I didn't fall in love with the plan. I fell in love with the man who was patient enough to wait 6 years for justice, who trusted me enough to make me a partner,
who built something real in the middle of all the deception." She took his hands. "So no, I'm not walking away. I'm staying, if you'll have me." The relief in Rowan's expression was worth everything they'd endured. "For as long as you'll let me." They stood there as dawn broke over Silver Creek. Two people who'd started as convenient partners and become something far more dangerous to anyone who mistook kindness for weakness or patience for surrender. The town had mocked her for marrying a poor cowboy. They had no idea she'd married the most dangerous man in the territory, someone who'd hidden his power so thoroughly that even his enemies never saw him coming until it was too late. And now, everyone would have to reckon with that truth. 3 days after Kane's arrest, the territorial governor arrived in Silver Creek with an entourage that included 2 federal judges, a team of lawyers, and enough armed marshals to make it clear this wasn't a courtesy visit. Eliza stood on the porch of what everyone now knew was the Hayes Ranch, watching the procession wind its way up the mountain pass that no longer needed to stay hidden. Beside her, Rowan was dressed in clothes she'd never seen him wear. Tailored suit, polished boots, the bearing of a man who'd always had power and had simply chosen not to display it. "You ready for this?" he asked.
"Should I be nervous?"
"Governor Pierce doesn't make social calls. If he's here, it's because Kane's lawyers are already fighting back harder than expected." Rowan adjusted his collar, a rare sign of tension. "And because Catherine Kane's testimony opened doors we weren't sure would ever unlock." The governor dismounted in the ranch yard, accepting Marcus's help with the formality of someone used to deference. He was younger than Eliza expected, maybe 50, with sharp eyes that took in everything about the ranch in seconds. "Mr. Hayes," Pierce extended his hand, "your reputation precedes you."
Though I admit, the reality is somewhat different from the reports I'd been receiving. Most of those reports came from Victor Kane, Rowan said, shaking his hand firmly. "I assume you've discovered how unreliable his information was?" "That's putting it mildly." Pierce's expression hardened. "The evidence you compiled, the documents, the testimonies, the financial records, it's damning. More damning than anything my own investigators managed to uncover in 2 years of trying." Which raises some questions. Such as how a simple cowboy managed to build a case that professional law enforcement couldn't. Pierce's tone wasn't accusatory, just curious. "And why you waited so long to bring it forward." Rowan gestured toward the house. "Perhaps we should discuss this inside, Governor. What I'm about to tell you isn't for public consumption." In Rowan's study, surrounded by maps and ledgers and 6 years of carefully documented evidence, he laid out the full truth about his brother James, about the initial attempts to work within the legal system that went nowhere because Kane owned everyone who mattered, about the decision to build something Kane couldn't touch, couldn't buy, couldn't threaten into silence. "So you deliberately made yourself appear weak," Pierce said slowly, processing it all. "Let Kane think you were just another victim waiting to be crushed." "While gathering enough evidence to bury him legally instead of violently. Yes." Rowan poured them both whiskey. "Because killing Kane would have just made me a murderer, and someone else would have stepped in to take his place. But destroying his empire, exposing the corruption he relied on, showing everyone that the law actually works when people are brave enough to use it, that changes everything." "It's also incredibly risky. If he discovered what you were doing..." "He would have killed me, and everyone I cared about. I know. That's why I married Eliza the way I did. Why I kept the ranch hidden. Why I let him think he was winning right up until the moment the marshals arrived." Rowan's voice went quiet. "My brother died because he fought Kane openly. I wasn't going to make that mistake." Pierce studied him for a long moment. "You're either the most patient man I've ever met, or the most dangerous. I haven't decided which." "Can't I be both?" The governor actually smiled. "I suppose you've earned that right. But here's the problem we're facing now. Kane's lawyers are arguing that the evidence was obtained illegally, that your marriage to Mrs. Hayes was a fraud designed to manipulate property rights, that several of your witnesses were coerced or paid off." Eliza, who'd been listening quietly, spoke up. "Our marriage wasn't fraud. I knew exactly what I was choosing." "Did you? Because Kane's lawyers are claiming you were misled about your husband's true financial situation, that the poverty you endured constitutes grounds for annulment based on deception." "Let them claim whatever they want," Eliza said sharply. "I stood in that cabin for months knowing Rowan was keeping secrets. I chose to trust him anyway. That's not fraud. That's faith." Pierce's expression softened slightly. "The courts may see it differently, Mrs. Hayes, particularly if Kane's legal team can convince a judge that your testimony is compromised by your emotional attachment to your husband." "Then we don't rely on my testimony alone," Rowan interrupted. "Catherine Kane's statement is independent and corroborated by banking records. Samuel Porter's land office documents speak for themselves. The 12 families who lost property to Kane, their testimonies don't depend on anything I did or didn't tell my wife." "True. But Kane's lawyers are already attacking Mrs. Catherine Kane's credibility, claiming she was coerced by you, that she's seeking revenge for an unhappy marriage, that her testimony is tainted by bias." Rowan's jaw tightened.
Catherine Kane shot her own husband to prevent him from committing murder in front of 200 witnesses. How is that bias?
According to their narrative, she was manipulated by you into believing her husband was a monster. They're painting you as the villain, Mr. Hayes, the scheming opportunist who destroyed a respectable businessman through deception and conspiracy. Pierce leaned forward. And here's the truly problematic part. They're not entirely wrong about the deception. You did hide your true resources. You did manipulate perceptions. You did build an elaborate plan that relied on people believing lies about who you were. The implications hit Eliza like a physical blow. You're saying Kane might win, even with everything he's done? I'm saying the legal battle is going to be harder than you anticipated.
Kane has resources you haven't accounted for. Lawyers from Chicago, judges he's cultivated relationships with over decades, political connections that don't disappear just because he's been arrested. Pierce's voice held regret. The evidence is strong, but proving it in court against that kind of opposition? That's a different fight entirely. Rowan stood, walked to the window, stared out at the ranch he'd built in secret. What do you need from me? The truth. All of it. No more hiving, no more strategic deceptions. If we're going to win this in court, we need your testimony to be absolutely unimpeachable. Which means you need to admit to everything you did, including the parts that might make you look manipulative or calculating. And if that destroys my credibility, then we lose. Kane walks free. Everything you built, everything you sacrificed, it all means nothing. Pierce stood as well. But if you're willing to stand in court and own every choice you made, explain why you made it, let a jury see the man who waited 6 years for justice instead of taking revenge. That might be enough. The room went silent. Eliza could see Rowan processing the implications, calculating odds the way he always did. But this time, the equation included variables he couldn't control. Public opinion, jury sentiment, the unpredictable nature of legal proceedings. There's something else, Pierce added. The evidence about your brother's death. The records Kane kept, proving he ordered it. We found them in the safe, exactly where your informant said they'd be. But Kane's lawyers are claiming the documents are forgeries, that you planted them to frame their client. That's insane, Eliza said. How could Rowan have planted evidence in a safe he didn't have access to? They're arguing he had access through Catherine Kane, that she was working with him all along, that the shooting was staged to make her seem credible. Pierce's expression held frustration. It's a weak argument, but it's creating reasonable doubt. And in a trial, that's all the defense needs. Rowan turned back from the window, and Eliza saw something in his face she'd never seen before. Not anger or determination, or the careful calculation he usually wore. This was desperation, raw and undisguised. My brother was murdered, he said quietly. His wife and daughters lost everything. They're still living in poverty in Denver because I send them money under a false name so Kane wouldn't find them and finish what he started. And you're telling me that might not matter? That a jury might believe I fabricated evidence about my own brother's death? I'm telling you that's what Kane's legal team is going to argue, and we need to be prepared for it. Pierce's voice gentled. I believe you, Mr. Hayes. The evidence supports your version of events. But belief isn't the same as proof in a courtroom. We need something undeniable. Like what? Like a witness who saw what happened to your brother. Someone Kane can't claim you manipulated or paid off. Everyone who witnessed James's death is either dead themselves or too scared to testify. That's why I spent 6 years building a case instead of relying on witnesses. Pierce nodded slowly. Then we need to shift strategy. Instead of trying to prove Kane ordered your brother's murder, which may be impossible without living witnesses,
We focus on the crimes we can prove. The land fraud, the forgeries, the bribery. Stack enough convictions, and the murder charge becomes secondary.
Secondary?
Rowan's voice went dangerously quiet.
My brother's death is secondary?
To winning the case? Yes. Because if we lose trying to prove everything, Kane walks away from all of it. But if we secure convictions on the crimes we can prove beyond doubt, he still goes to prison. Maybe not for killing your brother, but for destroying dozens of other families. Justice might not look the way you wanted, but it's still justice. Eliza watched Rowan struggle with that truth, saw the moment when pragmatism won over emotion.
How long until the trial?
3 months, maybe 4. Kane's lawyers are already filing for delays, claiming they need time to prepare. The judge is likely to grant at least some of their requests.
3 months.
Rowan looked at Eliza.
That's a long time to wait, with Kane's supporters still out there, still loyal to him.
Which brings me to the other reason I'm here, Pierce said. There have been threats. Against you, against Mrs. Hayes, against several of the witnesses. Nothing specific enough to act on, but enough to warrant concern. I'm assigning federal protection to anyone involved in the case.
I don't need protection on my own land.
With respect, Mr. Hayes, you're not invincible. And Kane's people have proven they're willing to kill. Let us help you. Rowan started to argue, but Eliza cut him off.
He's right. We can't fight everyone alone. Accept the help.
The look Rowan gave her held both frustration and reluctant agreement. Fine. But they stay in the valley. Keep out of ranch operations. I won't have armed marshals making my workers nervous. Agreed. Pierce stood, signaling the meeting's end. One more thing. The territorial legislature is calling a special session to review land claims throughout the region. Kane's fraudulent deeds have thrown hundreds of property rights into question. You're being asked to testify about the methods he used. When? 2 weeks. In the Capitol. Pierce paused. It's an opportunity, Mr. Hayes, to show the public who you really are, to explain why you did what you did. The newspapers will be there, political leaders, people who can influence public opinion before the trial. Or it's an opportunity for Kane's supporters to assassinate me in a public forum. That too, Pierce admitted, which is why I'm asking, not ordering. It's your choice. After the governor left, Eliza found Rowan in the barn, working on a saddle with methodical precision that spoke of needing to do something with his hands. You're going to testify, she said, not a question. I have to. Pierce is right. Public opinion matters. If people understand why I did what I did, it makes the legal case stronger. And if Kane's people kill you before you can testify? Then you finish it. You have copies of everything. You know where all the evidence is hidden. You've met the witnesses, know their stories. Rowan set down the saddle, finally meeting her eyes. That's why I told you everything, Eliza. Why I made you a partner instead of just a cover. Because I knew there was a chance I wouldn't survive this, and someone needed to be able to carry it forward. The casual way he discussed his own death made her want to scream. I didn't agree to be your widow. I agreed to be your wife. Same thing, potentially. Stop it. She crossed the barn, grabbed his face with both hands, forced him to look at her. Stop planning for your death and start planning to survive. Because I'm not doing this without you. I'm not raising our children alone while you're martyred as the man who took down Victor Kane. Rowan went very still. Children? You think I didn't notice I've missed my monthly courses twice now? You think I don't know what that means? Eliza felt tears threatening, but refused to let them fall. So yes, children, which means you need to survive this. Not just for me, for them. The transformation in Rowan's expression was immediate and complete. Shock giving way to wonder, giving way to fierce protectiveness. You're sure? Sure enough that you need to start fighting like someone who has everything to lose, instead of someone with nothing left. He pulled her close, holding her with a desperation that revealed how much the governor's visit had shaken him. I'm sorry. You're right. I've been so focused on destroying Kane that I forgot about building something worth living for after he's gone. Then remember, because our child deserves a father who comes home. They stood there for a long moment, two people who'd started as strategic partners and become something far more essential to each other's survival. When they finally separated, Rowan's expression had shifted from resigned acceptance to determined calculation. If I'm going to testify in the Capitol, I need to be smart about it. Not just show up and answer questions. I need to control the narrative. How? By telling the complete truth. Not just about Kane's crimes, but about my own choices. The lies I told. The people I used. The 6 years I spent building this trap. Rowan started pacing, his mind clearly racing. Pierce is right that the deception makes me look manipulative. But what if that's the point? What if I own it completely? Show them that, yes, I lied to everyone. But I did it because the legal system had failed my brother. Because the only way to fight corruption was to become invisible until I was strong enough to strike. That's risky. Admitting to deception could backfire. Everything's risky at this point. But at least this way, I'm controlling what gets revealed, instead of letting Kane's lawyers paint me however they want. He stopped pacing, looked at her directly. And I tell them about you. About our marriage. Not as a fraud or a deception, but as the one real thing I built in the middle of all the lies. Eliza felt something catch in her throat. What are you saying? I'm saying I married you for strategic reasons. That's true. But I fell in love with you for entirely different ones. And if a jury can see that, if they can understand that even in the middle of orchestrating Kane's downfall, I found something worth protecting beyond revenge, maybe they'll believe the rest of what I'm telling them. You're going to use our relationship as evidence of your character? I'm going to tell the truth about our relationship and let people draw their own conclusions. Rowan moved closer. But only if you're comfortable with that. Only if you're willing to stand beside me publicly and let everyone know that our marriage was complicated, but real. Of course I'm willing. Eliza paused, choosing her words carefully. I want to make sure you're not just strategizing. That this isn't another calculation where you say what needs to be said to win. It's both, Rowan admitted. It's strategy because everything in my life for 6 years has been strategy. But it's also truth. I love you, Eliza. Not because it's tactically advantageous, but because you're the first person who saw through all my carefully constructed lies and chose to trust me anyway. That's worth more than any revenge. Before Eliza could respond, Marcus burst into the barn, breathing hard like he'd been running. Boss, we've got a problem. 3 riders just came through the pass. They're not marshals, and they're not friendly. Rowan's hand went to his gun immediately. Where are they now? Stopped about a quarter-mile out. One of them's holding a white flag, claiming they want to talk. It's a trap. Maybe, or maybe it's actually a negotiation. Marcus looked between them. What do you want to do? Rowan thought for exactly 3 seconds. Get every man armed and positioned around the meeting point. If they try anything, we cut them down. But let's hear what they have to say. Rowan, Eliza started. Stay here, please. I can't focus if I'm worried about you. That's exactly why I'm coming with you. Because you need to see that I'm not something fragile that needs protecting. I'm your partner. Start treating me like one. For a moment, she thought he'd argue. Then he nodded. Fine, but you stay behind me, and if shooting starts, you run. Agreed? Agreed. They met the riders in an open area with good sight lines, surrounded by Rowan's men positioned in covered positions. The man holding the white flag was older, distinguished looking, wearing expensive clothes that marked him as someone important. "Mr. Hayes, Mrs. Hayes, my name is Richard Caldwell. I'm Victor Kane's lead attorney." "I know who you are," Rowan said. "What do you want?" "To make you an offer. A way to resolve this situation without destroying everyone involved." Caldwell dismounted slowly, hands visible. "My client is willing to plead guilty to certain charges. The land fraud, some of the financial irregularities, in exchange for the murder charges being dropped."
Why would I agree to that?
"Because the murder charges are the ones you can't prove. The ones that will tear this case apart and create reasonable doubt about everything else. Accept this plea, and Kane goes to prison. Not for life, perhaps, but for long enough that he'll never rebuild his empire. Refuse it, and you risk him walking free on all charges." Eliza felt her stomach drop. This was exactly what Governor Pierce had warned them about. The difference between perfect justice and practical justice. "He killed my brother," Rowan said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Allegedly. The evidence is circumstantial at best. But the land fraud, the forgeries, we both know those charges will stick. So the question is whether you want guaranteed partial justice or the risk of no justice at all."
How long would he serve?
15 years, maybe 20 with good behavior factored in. He'd be an old man by the time he's released. Broken, powerless. Everything he built would be gone. Rowan stood there, and Eliza could see the war happening inside him. The part that wanted Kane to pay for James's death versus the part that recognized this might be the best outcome they could realistically achieve. "I need to discuss this with my wife," Rowan said finally. Caldwell nodded. "You have 48 hours. After that, the offer expires and we proceed to trial. Win or lose, take our chances with a jury." After the lawyers left, Rowan stood in the middle of his ranch, surrounded by the empire he'd built in secret, and looked more lost than Eliza had ever seen him. "Tell me what you're thinking," she said quietly. "I'm thinking about James's daughters. About how they'll never know their father because Kane had him killed. About how this plea deal means Kane never admits to that crime, never faces consequences for the thing that started all of this." "But he faces consequences for everything else." "Is that enough?" Rowan's voice cracked slightly. "Is 15 years in prison enough for destroying dozens of families? For driving people off their land? For building an empire on other people's suffering? I don't know, but it's more than he has now, more than most men in his position ever face." Eliza moved closer. "And it guarantees he loses everything. His power, his reputation, his freedom. Isn't that what you wanted? To prove that corruption doesn't win?" "I wanted him to burn for what he did to my brother." "I know, but you also wanted to protect the child we're going to have. And taking this deal means you survive to raise them. Means you don't risk everything on a trial that might end with Kane walking free and coming after us again." Rowan closed his eyes, and Eliza saw the moment when the man who'd spent 6 years planning revenge started to become the man who needed to think about the future instead of the past. "James would hate this," he said quietly. "He'd want me to fight for complete justice." "James is dead. You're not. And you have a family now that needs you alive more than they need you martyred for a cause." Eliza took his hands. "Take the deal, Rowan. Let Kane rot in prison for the crimes you can prove, and then spend the rest of your life building something better than revenge." "You really think that's the right choice?" "I think it's the choice that lets you sleep at night, knowing our child will have a father. That's the only metric that matters to me." Rowan pulled her close, holding her like she was the only thing keeping him anchored. 48 hours. We have 48 hours to decide whether I'm willing to let my brother's murder go unpunished." "Not unpunished, just not prosecuted. Kane knows what he did. He'll spend every day in prison, knowing he got away with murder, only because you were merciful enough to accept a deal instead of destroying him completely. That's a different kind of punishment."
They stood there as the sun set over the ranch. Two people facing an impossible choice between perfect justice and practical survival. And Eliza knew, watching Rowan's face, that the man who'd started this fight for revenge was slowly transforming into someone who understood that winning meant more than destruction. It meant building something worth protecting. The next morning, word spread through Silver Creek that Rowan was considering a plea deal, and the reaction was immediate and divided. Some people, those who'd lost land to Kane, who'd suffered under his corruption, were furious that he might escape murder charges. Others, particularly those who understood how risky trials could be, supported taking the guaranteed conviction. Thomas Brennan found Eliza in town, his expression troubled. "People are saying your husband is selling out, that he's letting Kane buy his way out of justice. People don't understand the legal realities. A trial means risk. Risk that Kane walks free on everything. But if he takes the deal, Kane never admits to the murders, never faces consequences for the worst things he did." Thomas's hands shook. "My sister's husband died because of Kane. If Hayes lets that go unpunished, Kane goes to prison for 20 years either way. The question is whether we guarantee that outcome or gamble it on a trial." "It's not gambling when you have the truth on your side." "That's exactly what it is," Eliza said sharply. "The truth doesn't always win in court. Good lawyers, sympathetic juries, procedural technicalities, all of that matters more than truth sometimes. And if we lose, Kane walks free and comes after everyone who testified against him. Is that what you want?" Thomas looked away, struggling. "No. But I want him to pay for everything, not just some of it." "So do I. So does Rowan. But we're also trying to survive this. And survival sometimes means accepting imperfect justice." She left him standing there, troubled but thoughtful. The conversation played on her mind as she rode back to the ranch, where she found Rowan in his study, surrounded by documents and looking like he hadn't slept. "I've been reviewing everything," he said without preamble. "Every piece of evidence, every witness statement, every document we have about James's death. And Pierce was right. It's all circumstantial. The payment records prove Kane paid someone, but they don't prove what for. The timeline proves James died shortly after refusing to sell, but that's correlation, not causation. Without a witness or a confession, we can't prove Kane ordered the murder beyond reasonable doubt. So we take the deal." "So we take the deal," Rowan agreed, but his voice held no satisfaction. "And I spend the rest of my life knowing my brother's killer never admitted what he did." "But you spend that life with us, with me and our child, building the ranch, helping the families Kane destroyed, creating something good instead of just destroying something evil." Eliza sat beside him. "That has to count for something." "It does. It just—" He stopped, struggling. "It just feels like losing." "It's not losing. It's winning differently than you planned. That's all." Rowan looked at her for a long moment, then pulled her into his arms. "How did you get so wise?" "I married a man who taught me that patience and strategy matter more than immediate satisfaction. I'm just applying those lessons to a different problem." They sat there together, two people who'd learned that sometimes the hardest fight wasn't against external enemies, but against your own need for perfect vengeance. And slowly, gradually, Rowan started to accept that the victory he'd planned for 6 years wasn't the victory he was going to get, but it was still a victory worth taking. The next day, Rowan sent word to Caldwell that he'd accept the plea deal on 3 conditions. First, Kane had to publicly allocate funds to compensate the families he'd defrauded, using his remaining assets to make partial restitution.
Second, Catherine Kane would be granted immunity for her cooperation and protected from any civil suits. Third, the evidence about James's death would be entered into the public record, even if it wasn't prosecuted, ensuring history would know what Kane had done. Caldwell agreed to all three conditions without negotiation, which told Eliza the defense had been prepared to give up far more. But it didn't matter. They had what they needed. Kane would go to prison. The families would get something back. And the truth would be preserved even if justice couldn't be fully served. The day the plea was formally accepted, Eliza stood beside Rowan in a courtroom packed with people whose lives had been destroyed by Kane's corruption. The judge read the charges: 23 counts of fraud, 11 counts of forgery, conspiracy, bribery, and a list of other crimes that took 10 minutes to recite. Kane pleaded guilty to all of them, his voice barely audible, his face that of a man who'd lost everything. When the judge sentenced him to 20 years in territorial prison, the courtroom erupted. Some people cheered, others wept. A few shouted that it wasn't enough, that he should hang for what he'd done. But Rowan just stood there, watching Kane be led away in chains, and Eliza saw something release in his expression. Not satisfaction, not triumph, just closure. The kind that comes when you finally stop carrying weight you've held for years. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed them with questions, but Rowan waved them off. I have nothing to say except that justice, while imperfect, still matters. And anyone who thinks corruption pays should remember that it took 6 years, but Kane still fell. As they rode back toward the ranch, Eliza noticed Rowan wasn't heading for the mountain pass. Instead, he turned toward town, toward the cemetery she'd passed dozens of times but never entered. Where are we going? To tell my brother it's over. James Hayes's grave was marked with a simple stone, weathered by time but still readable. Rowan dismounted, stood there for a long moment, then spoke quietly. I couldn't prove it, James. Couldn't make Kane admit what he did to you. But he's in prison, lost everything. And your girls. I'm going to bring them home. Give them the life you wanted them to have. Give them the ranch we talked about building together. His voice cracked. It's not perfect justice, but it's all I could get. I hope that's enough. Eliza stood back, giving him space to grieve and say goodbye. When he finally turned away from the grave, his eyes were wet, but his shoulders were straighter than she'd seen in weeks. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For reminding me that moving forward matters more than looking back. That building something good is better than destroying something evil. He took her hand. I spent 6 years focused on revenge. Time to spend the rest of my life focused on something better. They rode home together as the sun set over the mountains. Two people who'd started as convenient partners, become strategic allies, and ended up as something far more essential. The town that had mocked their marriage would have to reckon with the truth that the poor cowboy had been powerful all along, and the desperate woman had chosen exactly right. Kane was finished. The empire built on suffering had crumbled. And what rose in its place wasn't just justice, but the beginning of something worth fighting for. A family. A future. A legacy that would outlast revenge. The letter arrived 6 weeks after Kane's sentencing, delivered by a federal marshal who refused to leave until Rowan read it in his presence. Eliza watched her husband's face go from cautious to shocked, to something she couldn't quite identify as he scanned the pages. When he finally looked up, his hands were shaking. It's from Margaret, he said quietly. James's wife. What does she want? To come home. To bring the girls back to the ranch. Rowan's voice cracked slightly.
She says she's been following the trial. Says she knows it's finally safe. Says her daughters deserve to know the land their father died for." The marshal cleared his throat. "Mrs. Hayes, Margaret Hayes, that is. She's requesting safe passage through territory that might still have Kane's sympathizers. Governor Pierce asked me to personally escort her and the children, if you approve the visit." "Approve?" Rowan looked at him like he'd lost his mind. "They're family. Tell Margaret to pack everything. I'm bringing them home. Permanently."
After the marshal left, Eliza found Rowan standing in what had been James's old room, untouched since his brother's death.
"You've been saving this for them."
"I always planned to bring them back. Just had to make sure it was safe first." He ran his hand along the bed frame James had built. "The girls were 3 and 5 when they left. They won't even remember this place. Then we'll help them build new memories, better ones." But Rowan's expression held worry. "What if Margaret blames me? What if she thinks I should have done more, moved faster, saved James instead of spending 6 years planning?" "Then you tell her the truth, that you did the only thing that would actually work, that patience saved lives, even if it couldn't save his." Eliza moved closer. "And you introduce her to her niece or nephew who exists because you chose to survive instead of seeking revenge." The mention of the baby shifted something in Rowan's face.
"When do we tell people?"
"When I'm far enough along that hiding it becomes ridiculous, which, based on how this dress is fitting, will be in about 3 weeks." They spent the next 10 days preparing the ranch for Margaret and her daughters, cleaning rooms, building furniture, stocking supplies. The workers noticed the activity and started asking questions, which led to Rowan finally explaining who James had been and why he'd spent 6 years hiding his true resources. "Your brother owned part of this ranch?" Marcus asked, his weathered face showing surprise. "He owned half, left it to me when he died, but I couldn't claim it openly without Kane coming after it. So I let everyone think I was just another broke cowboy." Rowan paused. "His daughters inherit his share when they come of age. Everything I've built, half of it belongs to them." The revelation rippled through the ranch hands, reshaping their understanding of the man they worked for.
But instead of resentment, Eliza saw respect growing. The boss, who'd seemed cautious and secretive, had actually been protecting his family's legacy the entire time. Margaret arrived on a cold morning with 2 girls who looked exactly like their father. 10 and 12 now, old enough to understand what they'd lost, but young enough to still hope for better. Rowan met them in the ranch yard, and Eliza watched him struggle to hold himself together as Margaret stepped down from the wagon. "You look older," Margaret said softly. 6 years will do that." Rowan's voice was rough. "Margaret, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I couldn't save him. Couldn't move fast enough." "Stop." She held up a hand. "I read everything. Every document you sent to the territorial governor. Every piece of evidence you gathered. James would have stormed Kane's office with a gun and gotten himself killed, accomplishing nothing. You were smarter. You actually won. It doesn't feel like winning." Because you're still alive to feel guilty about it. That's the price of survival. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "But Rowan, you avenged him. You destroyed the man who killed him. You made sure Kane lost everything. That's more than most people get. More than I ever dared hope for." The 2 girls stood uncertainly nearby, watching this exchange between adults discussing a father they barely remembered. Eliza approached them gently. "I'm Eliza, your Uncle Rowan's wife." The older girl studied her carefully. "Is it true what Mama said? That our father owned land here?" "Half this ranch was his. Your uncle has been holding it in trust for you." "Why didn't he just take it for himself?" "Because your Uncle Rowan understands that some things are more important than ownership. Like family. Like doing right by the people you love, even when they're gone." Over dinner that night,
Margaret told them about the years in Denver, about working as a seamstress to support her daughters, about the money that appeared every month from an anonymous benefactor she'd known was Rowan, but never acknowledged, about teaching her girls that their father had died for something that mattered, even if justice took time to arrive.
"I never remarried," she said quietly. "People thought I was foolish, holding on to the memory of a dead man instead of finding someone who could actually provide for us. But I knew Rowan was out there fighting for James, and I wanted to wait until that fight was finished before moving forward."
"And now?" Rowan asked.
"Now I need to learn how to live again instead of just surviving."
Margaret looked around the house James had helped build.
"This ranch, it's what James dreamed of creating. A place where family mattered more than profit, where doing right by people was the foundation of everything."
"It still is," Rowan confirmed. "And half of it belongs to your daughters. When they're old enough, they'll decide what to do with their inheritance. Until then, we build it together." The older girl, Sarah, spoke up.
"What if we don't want to be ranchers? What if we want different lives?"
"Then you use your inheritance to build those lives," Eliza said before Rowan could answer. "Your father's legacy isn't about forcing you into a specific path. It's about giving you the freedom to choose your own." Margaret smiled, genuine warmth breaking through years of grief.
"Thank you, both of you, for remembering who James was and honoring it."
But the peace didn't last long. 3 days after Margaret's arrival, Thomas Brennan rode up to the ranch with news that drained the color from his face. "Kane escaped." The words hit like physical blows. Rowan stood so fast his chair fell over. "What?" "During a prisoner transfer to the territorial facility, 3 men ambushed the wagon, killed 2 marshals, freed Kane, and disappeared into the mountains." Thomas's hands shook. "They're saying he's gathering supporters, planning one final strike against everyone who testified." Eliza felt ice form in her stomach.
"When?"
"Nobody knows, but the marshals found evidence he's been communicating with his remaining loyalists for weeks. This was planned before the trial even ended." Rowan's face had gone hard and dangerous. "Get Margaret and the girls into the safe room, now. Marcus, arm every man we have. If Kane's coming here, we end it permanently this time." The next hours were controlled chaos. The ranch transformed into a fortress, with armed men at every approach, and families moved to defensible positions. Margaret refused to hide, insisting on staying with a rifle where she could protect her daughters herself. Eliza wanted to argue but understood. Some battles required everyone to stand. "He's going to come at night," Rowan said, studying the approaches. "Use darkness to get close. We need fires lit around the perimeter. Make it impossible to sneak in."
"Unless he doesn't come here at all," Eliza said quietly.
"Unless he goes after the town, the people who testified, the ones who can't defend themselves." Rowan's expression shifted to horror.
"He'd burn Silver Creek to prove a point?"
"Wouldn't he? He already burned his own bank. What's stopping him from destroying everything else out of spite?" The decision was immediate. Rowan split their forces, half to defend the ranch, half to ride for town. "If we're wrong, if he comes here instead, the ranch can hold until we return. But if he attacks the town and we're not there—" "People die," Eliza finished. "So we ride. Now." They reached Silver Creek to find it already burning. Not the whole town, just targeted buildings. The courthouse where Kane had been sentenced. The newspaper office that had published stories about his crimes. The homes of 3 families who'd testified most damaging evidence. Systematic destruction meant to send a message. Cooperation has consequences. "How many men does he have?" Marcus asked, surveying the chaos. 8 that we can see, maybe more hidden." Rowan dismounted, his gun already drawn. "We need to evacuate the civilians first, then corner Kane before he disappears again. But Kane had no intention of disappearing. He stood in the center of the main street, surrounded by burning buildings and armed men, waiting. When he saw Rowan, he smiled, broken, bitter, completely unhinged. "Finally," Kane called out. "The great Rowan Hayes, the patient strategist. Come to watch his victory burn?" "This isn't victory, Kane. This is desperation." Rowan moved forward carefully, his men fanning out to cover positions. "You already lost. Running just proves it." "Lost? I spent 20 years building an empire, and you destroyed it in 6 months of legal maneuvering. But you know what I realized in that prison cell?" Kane's eyes were wild. "If I can't have my empire, nobody gets to enjoy the world I left behind." "So you'll burn it? Kill innocent people because you couldn't accept consequences?" "I'll make sure everyone remembers that crossing Victor Kane has a price, even if it's the last thing I do." Kane raised his gun, aiming not at Rowan, but at the general store where families were sheltering. Eliza saw it happening in slow motion, the finger tightening on the trigger, the women and children visible through the windows, the moment when Kane chose mass murder as his final legacy. She didn't think. She just moved. Her shot caught Kane in the arm, spoiling his aim. His bullet went wide, shattering glass but hitting no one. Then chaos erupted. Kane's men opening fire, Rowan's men returning it, the street becoming a battlefield in seconds. Eliza dove behind a water trough, reloading with hands that refused to shake. She'd practiced shooting with Rowan for months, but practice was different from actually pulling the trigger with a human being in your sights. Different from knowing you'd just changed someone's life forever. But she didn't regret it. The gunfight lasted less than 3 minutes. Kane's men were outnumbered and outpositioned. 4 surrendered immediately. 3 tried to run and were captured within a block. 1 died defending Kane until the end. And Kane himself, wounded, defeated, surrounded, finally dropped his weapon. "Just shoot me," he said to Rowan. "Make it clean. I'd do the same for you." "No, you wouldn't. You'd make it hurt." Rowan gestured for the marshals who'd arrived during the fight. "Victor Kane, you're under arrest for escape, murder of federal officers, arson, attempted mass murder, and anything else we can think of before you hang." "You can't prove. I can prove everything. There are 200 witnesses to what you just tried to do. You shot at civilians. You burned the town. You made it impossible for even your own lawyers to save you." Rowan leaned in close. "You wanted everyone to remember what happens when they cross you? Fine. They'll remember. They'll remember you died a coward who attacked defenseless people because you couldn't accept that you lost." Kane was led away, and this time there would be no plea deals, no complicated trials, no legal maneuvering. Just a noose and a sentence everyone agreed was deserved. In the aftermath, as the town worked to extinguish fires and treat the wounded, Eliza found herself sitting on the steps of the courthouse, one of the few buildings that hadn't burned. Rowan sat beside her, both of them too exhausted for words. "You saved those people," he said finally. "That shot, if you'd missed—" "I didn't miss. You taught me not to." Eliza looked at her hands, still steady despite everything.
Is this what you felt like for 6 years? Knowing you'd have to hurt people to stop someone worse?
"Every single day."
How did you live with it?
"By remembering that some fights are worth the cost, and by having someone beside me who understood why it mattered." He took her hand. "We're not done yet. We still have to rebuild. Help the families who lost homes. Make sure Kane's remaining assets go to restoration instead of legal fees."
And your brother's girls? Margaret? They just watched us turn their new home into a battlefield.
"They watched us defend it. There's a difference." Rowan's voice held certainty. "Tomorrow we start building something better. Tonight, we just survive. The rebuilding took months. Rowan used Kane's seized assets, everything the courts hadn't already allocated to victims, to fund the reconstruction. The courthouse was rebuilt stronger. The homes were restored better than before.
The newspaper got a new press that let them expand coverage beyond Silver Creek. But more than physical reconstruction, something else was changing. The families who'd been driven off their land were returning, using the legal precedent from Kane's trial to reclaim what had been stolen. The corrupt officials who'd enabled Kane found themselves facing investigations and resignations. The territorial governor appointed new judges, new sheriffs, people who understood that power required accountability. And Eliza found herself at the center of it all. She hadn't planned to become a public figure. But when the women of Silver Creek asked her to speak at a meeting about forming a citizen oversight committee, she couldn't refuse. When the territorial legislature invited her to testify about how corruption had affected families, she traveled to the Capitol despite being visibly pregnant and told them exactly what needed to change.
The problem wasn't just Victor Kane, she said to a room full of politicians. The problem was a system that let him operate unchecked for decades, that prioritized profit over people, that made it easier to look away than to fight back.
What would you recommend? One legislator asked.
Transparency, independent audits of land claims, term limits for appointed positions, protection for whistleblowers, and consequences, real consequences, for officials who abuse power. She paused, letting the words sink in. My husband spent 6 years gathering evidence because he knew the legal system would fail him if he fought openly. That's unacceptable. People shouldn't have to become investigators and strategists just to get justice. The recommendations became law within a year. The Kane Accountability Act, they called it, though Eliza thought the name gave too much credit to the man who'd caused the problems. But it didn't matter what it was called. What mattered was that it worked.
Margaret became the ranch's financial manager, using skills she'd developed in Denver to organize the operation professionally. James's daughters grew into confident young women who worked the ranch alongside the men without anyone questioning whether they belonged there. Marcus trained a new generation of hands who understood that loyalty meant something beyond just following orders. And Rowan became the man Eliza had always known he could be. Not the patient strategist plotting revenge, but the builder creating legacy. He helped establish a loan program for families trying to reclaim stolen land. He testified at trials for other corruption cases, showing people that fighting powerful men was possible. He turned the hidden ranch into a symbol of what could be built when people chose principles over profit. When their daughter was born on a cold January morning, they named her Grace. Not after anyone specific, just after the concept, the grace of second chances, of choosing mercy over vengeance, of building something beautiful in the aftermath of destruction. She looks like you, Margaret said, holding her niece for the first time. Strong, determined, ready to fight the world if necessary. God, I hope not, Eliza said, exhausted but smiling. I hope she gets to live in a world where fighting isn't necessary. Then you'd better keep building that world, because it doesn't create itself. The years that followed proved Margaret right. Building a better world required constant work, constant vigilance, constant willingness to stand up when others would rather look away. But Eliza discovered she was good at it, better than she'd ever been at playing the society woman her father had wanted her to be. She established schools in communities Kane had deliberately kept uneducated. She organized women's cooperatives that let them own property independently. She became the voice people listened to when they needed someone to articulate why justice mattered more than convenience. And Rowan supported her every step, never questioning her right to build her own legacy alongside his. 5 years after Kane's execution,
He'd been hanged exactly as predicted. The territorial governor came to the ranch for a visit. But this time, it wasn't about trials or testimony. It was about recognition. "The legislature wants to name the new county after you," Governor Pierce said to Rowan. "Hayes County, as recognition for what you did to expose corruption." "Absolutely not," Rowan said immediately. "I told them you'd refuse. So they're offering an alternative. Name it after your brother, James County, as memorial to the man whose death started the investigation that changed everything." Rowan looked at Margaret, who nodded through tears. James would have hated having a county named after him, but he'd have loved knowing his death meant something beyond just being a cautionary tale. "Then it's settled," Pierce said. "James County. And Mrs. Hayes, Eliza, the women's education initiative you championed? Full territorial funding approved. You're getting everything you asked for." "Not everything," Eliza corrected, "but enough to start. The rest we'll build ourselves." After Pierce left, Eliza found Rowan standing in front of James's grave, which had been moved to a place of honor on the ranch property. Their daughter Grace played nearby, supervised by her older cousins, who'd become more like sisters than distant relatives. "You thinking about what might have been?" she asked. "Thinking about what is. James didn't get to see his daughters grow up. Didn't get to build the ranch he dreamed of. Didn't get justice in his lifetime." Rowan's voice held grief, but also acceptance. "But his daughters are thriving. His ranch is legendary. His memory changed territorial law. That's legacy. Real legacy." "And us? What's our legacy?" Rowan turned to face her, and Eliza saw the man who'd waited 6 years for revenge, transformed completely into someone who built futures instead of destroying pasts. "Our legacy is proving that patience wins, that choosing to fight smart instead of fighting angry actually works, that building something good matters more than destroying something evil." That's a lot of pressure for one marriage to carry. "Good thing we're not just one marriage. We're a family, a community, a movement." He pulled her close. "And we're just getting started." 10 years later, when people told the story of how Victor Kane's empire fell, they didn't talk about trials or evidence or legal strategy. They talked about a woman who married a poor cowboy everyone thought was worthless, and discovered he was the most dangerous man in the territory. They talked about patience rewarded and corruption punished. They talked about choosing partnership over pride and building legacy over seeking revenge. And when young women asked Eliza if they should marry men everyone doubted, men who seemed to have nothing, men who were mocked and dismissed, she always gave the same answer. "Don't marry what people see on the surface. Don't marry wealth or status or what makes sense on paper. Marry character. Marry patience. Marry someone who understands that real power isn't about domination. It's about building something that lasts long after you're gone. Marry someone who'll stand beside you when the world says you're making a mistake, because those are the people who change the world." She'd pause, letting the words sink in. "And if the world mocks your choice? Good. That means you're doing something that matters. Because the easy choices never change anything." The ranch that had started as a hidden sanctuary became a symbol of what was possible when people chose principles over profit. The marriage that began as strategic deception became the foundation of generational change. The woman who'd been mocked for marrying beneath her station became the voice that shaped territorial policy for decades. And the man who'd spent 6 years hiding his true power, he became exactly what his brother had always believed him to be. Someone who understood that the greatest victories aren't won through force, but through patience, strategy, and the courage to build something better than what existed before. The town had mocked her for marrying a poor cowboy,
and she'd let them mock, because their opinions never mattered as much as the truth she'd chosen to believe in.